tell you about the definition. So basically, we started. I don't know if we got very far into it. We started with the Rambam's. I have to bring my Rambam. We started with the Rambam giving us. Let's use this one. So that's where I got to this Aristotle quote. So basically, Aristotle says this, or at least a P perish Aquinas, which I think was the correct pshat. And the Rambam follows this. Now, in the sense, the Rambam thinks that the study of the soul, what a soul is, belongs to the study of both nature and beyond nature, or whatever you call it, physics and metaphysics, both of things that change and of things that don't change. This is very interesting, because, and that's where he puts it. So, we discussed this. From where people put things, we could find things out, right? We said this last time.
Yeah, organization.
And he doesn't have like a ikke riesh lahamanj, that a person has a soul, that a person has something that survives death, these kind of things which you would expect, like Rav Sadigon does have some sort of ikke like that, in some sense, right? We don't find that in the Rambam. What we do find is him thinking that everyone should know at least the basics of how the world works, or what the world is. That we do find him doing, and then we discussed how he thinks that that's the mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem. It's interesting because today I was noticing the Tanya says, talks about the difference between learning Halach Negla and learning Nester. And he's like, he talks about this problem that we'll get to, that there's things that are harder to grasp or further from human cognition generally. And then he says, but it's still a mitzvah to know it. But then he says, well, it's only one mitzvah out of 613 mitzvahs, but so 613 mitzvahs, 612 mitzvahs, according to him, which I don't know why that number seems to be inaccurate, even according to him. Maybe it's lav dafka.
612?
612 are talking about Olam Hazeh, like how to act in this world. And those mitzvahs have the mala of being understood, because like we know what a cow is, and if you shecht a cow, everyone understands what a cow is and what shechting is and so on. But nobody really knows what God is and what the angels are and so on. In the sense, according to him, we don't know their essence, we only know their existence. Whatever that exactly means, whatever he thinks it means. But the point is that it's not, the simple way of saying what he's trying to get at is that these are not concepts or things immediately intelligible to people. It takes work to get to them, at least. So, therefore, that's like a problem. So there's in some way it's a lesser knowledge, it's a lesser science. Not because of its object, but because of its level of understanding.
Distance from the intellect?
Yeah, its level of it. So where did we get to this? So let me not fly away, because I started backwards. So we talked how the Rambam made a mitzvah out of knowing everything, and this mitzvah, the mitzvah of knowing God or loving God, which sort of means the same thing. Again, the difference, if you want to ask, what's the difference between mitzvahs Metzias Hashem, mitzvahs Ahavas Hashem? The difference is basically that Ahavas Hashem is the action, according to him. You mekayim mitzvahs Ahavas Hashem when you read philosophy. Whose goal is obviously to get to mitzvah Yitzchok Hashem. So they don't actually, something like that, that's as far as I can tell. They don't actually, or even the goal of Ahavas Hashem is to know God, as he says. That's
it doesn't have to be like God that you don't know, right? It doesn't exist.
That's what he's. No, you can't know God. You can't. It's the goal. It's in other words, to him it's the opposite. I think the Tanya in general has the opposite to you. In other words, to him you love God in order to know him, not you know God in order to love him. Because what does that mean to love God? That's meaningless to him. Loving God can only mean knowing him. Because what does it mean? Like you could say different. Than love, you want to be close to him, you want to. But all of these things are just going to be able to mean knowing. So for him, you love God in order to know him. Whereas for other people, and loving God, what does it mean loving God? So loving God means, I love it, okay. It means like setting yourself up in a way where you're going to get to know him, as far as I can tell. And for other people, it would be the opposite. Like you need to know God Hashem in order to love him. So you would flip the cause and the effect. To flip the goal and the means. Exactly. Flip the ends and the means. For many other people, the goal would be loving God, and that's why they say, well, if I love God without knowing him, who cares? As long as I love him. But the Rambam will tell you.
Right?
No, I can't fly to that. But we can't. The Rambam would tell you that when you feel loving God in the sense of feeling love for God or whatever, that's meaningless. That doesn't mean anything according to him. Mostly because who's this God that you're loving? So it turns out, like Socrates would say, like, okay, you love God, but what's God? And then you end up having to know. So knowledge ends up to be the thing that even love can only be defined by. Anyways, so therefore loving God means learning which means learning how the world works. So anyways, now it's interesting. So I don't remember how far we got. We didn't get anywhere with this. So now, so I can tell you the basic of what he does. Now, how does the world work? Or what does it mean? So the Rambam had these two things, which he found in the Mishnah. I think we discussed this, which are called Maaseh Bereshis and Maaseh Merkava. Right? We went through them. Yeah, Masech Chagiga. Which literally mean, according to the Pshat, Maaseh Bereshis just means the Pshat of the first Parsha of Bereshis. Maaseh Merkava just means the first Parsha of Sefer Yecheskel, which talks about the Merkava. That's what it means. And if you read the Gemara, that's definitely what. There's no doubt that that's what it means.
You can't say Shai as part of this also, or no?
Oh, whatever. You can get into details, like okay, so Shai is. But the point is, when they talk about Maaseh Merkava, they're referring to taking this Parsha and reading it and being doirish it, like explaining it in public and so on, or in private, however the halacha exactly is. But that's what they're referring to. Of course, you could learn from other psukim. I'm not getting it, but that's basically what it means. The Rambam, did we do this? Tell me if you know already everything I say. The Rambam very clearly decided, and not only him. I mean, the Mekubalim all accept something like this. The Rambam, probably maybe others before him, but I know the Rambam. The Rambam decided that these two definitions are not, well, maybe it's still questionable if he thinks that they're even in those two parshas. At least for Maaseh Merkava, I'm not sure. But for Maaseh Bereshis, of course, he thinks that it's somewhat in it. But in any case, he doesn't think that it's any more about interpreting a certain, passage in the Tanakh. What he thinks it is about is a certain concept or certain science, a certain kind of part of knowledge. And therefore, he says there are two parts of knowledge, and these two words match up for him very well with the Aristotelian definition of two main sciences. And if you ask an Aristotelian what is the most greatest way to divide all science, all human knowledge, and that's at least how the Rambam, I don't know if it's in Aristotle, it is. In any case, one of the ways in which you could categorize all of science, in the sense of all knowledge, is to talk about science of changing things and science of unchanging things. Those are all things that exist. There are things that change, which is everything in this world, in some level, everything even in the heavens, in the sense of the spheres and so on.
The heavens have a different property.
Yeah, they're somewhere in between, but they're somewhere in between. The Rambam puts them somewhere in between, and all of his tradition does.
So is not like that.
Yeah, we'll get that. One second. But I'm giving you I'm up to the two-part division. We'll get to three-part divisions. Because it can make things complicated. But the Mishnah has two-part division. So the two-part division is only this: things that change and things that don't change. The heavens, in some level, in some way, change at least because they move, so they have some change. They're not static entirely. Although static is a very bad word to use for this, but because it makes you think of something like sterile, but that's not what it means. And some things are eternal, which are basically God and the angels for the Rambam, or separate forms, which are angels, or separate intellects for Aristotle, because it doesn't really talk about separate forms, although the Rambam does talk about it as separate forms. So these are the two kind of knowledges. There are known in English often as physics and metaphysics, which are very bad translations because it doesn't reveal anything. So I'm going to call it the science of the changing things and the science of the unchanging things, or the science of eternal things, which is the original language.
Contingent.
Yeah, unchanging. That's the no kind of change. That's that. So now the Rambam decided. Well, Maaseh Bereshis is obviously like the science of changing things, which is the things that Parshas Bereshis talks about, at least seems to talk about. Okay, that one makes sense. Maaseh Merkava, I don't know how we got from that to the science of unchanging things, and I don't even know how if he thinks that that's the correct interpretation of Yecheskel, and this is a question, I don't know the answer, I should look up if anyone asked this question. Because I said it already in 3 classes in the past 2 weeks, and I've said that each time that someone should tell me the answer, nobody did, maybe you will. Point is, and the Rambam in Chelek Gimel, Sarah interprets Maaseh Merkava of Yecheskel. Because he says, my book is about this, so I should be interpreting it, right? And turns out, at least for most people that want to understand what he's saying, turns out that he interprets it about the heavens. So the Galgalim are obviously Galgal, Oifan. These are basically the heavens. Some of it might even be talking about the four Yesodis, the world of four elements of this world. But in any case, it definitely does not interpret.
Yecheskel?
Yeah, Yecheskel. The Rambam definitely does not interpret Sefer Yecheskel as talking about the angels. This is a very weird thing. He might partially, yes, I don't know. In general, his interpretation is that it's talking about the heavens and astronomy, in other words.
When the Malachim and Yecheskel are referring to celestial things?
Like maybe you could talk about the minds of those things or the souls of those things, but not the souls as in themselves, which is where we get to this level of unchanging things. and definitely not about God himself, right? So therefore, I don't know what's the deal with him reading Massive Kova. We have to look better in Chelek Gimel to figure this out. I'm sure there's a basic answer that we could find in the text, but I don't know it. But in any case, his definition of Massive Kova and Chagiga is something like this: everything about God and the soul and the angels, something like that. Which is not a definition; it's just a list. But as far as I can tell, his definition is what Aristotle calls metaphysics, first philosophy, and so on. Aristotle has different definitions for this, but at least one definition is things that are not changing, the science of unchanging things, or the most general science, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, that's the second knowledge, and of course the Rambam has, so another way of separating the mitzvah Hashem, mitzvah Hashem would be something like this, to say that so the first level, the higher level, so to speak, Masim Kavod level, on signs of unchanging things, is the mitzvah of knowing God, because God is obviously the most unknowing thing, the most unchanging thing. One of his important definitions for him, the Rambam also, although it's even more than that, because it's entirely not contingent. Angels might be in some way contingent.
Well, on God is a matter of effect.
Is what?
The contingent on God. I'm saying
God
is the contingency.
Right, exactly. Without God, there could be no angels. Mm-hmm. So angels have some kind of potentiality in them already, or some kind of contingency. Although that's a weird thing to say, but we have to figure out the language for that. I don't know, but there's true.
But in terms of its unchangingness,
they don't change, but they're still
with God in equal way.
No, nothing shares anything with God in an equal way, in an equivocal way, right? Forget in a non-equivocal way. Nothing shares anything with God. So no, they have to be entirely different. But how exactly for this we have to read more. I don't know to tell you in 1 second. No. So they don't share anything with God. So there's definitely two levels. But and at least in some level, that's why I said, in the most broadest category, you put God into the category of things that don't change. But of course, God is a lot more than unchanging, because the category of not changing doesn't apply to him. That's another way of saying it.
I just don't know if that's an accidental attribute or a necessary one.
Which one?
God's unchangingness. Like if that comes from a prior metaphysical.
No, it's not correct. It's not correct to say that God isn't changing, because God doesn't not change either. That's another way of saying it, which we get from Chelek Aleph and so on. Because this whole category doesn't really apply to him. Well, while it does apply in some way to angels.
Why, it's too positive?
And so on. Yeah. Positive is not a correct word. The point is that, it's not in the category, his being is not the same kind of being as anything else, so therefore anything you say about any other being doesn't really apply to him, because it's a different category of being. Which is known as the category of necessary beings. Okay, Kesdrem is, of which there's only one, so it's not like a category, but that's another thing. Anyways, Kesdrem, God belongs to this, and that for the first mitzvah and the first chapter, he goes from top to bottom, which is the correct order of things. Remember, there's the real order and the order of knowing them. Very important for Rambam, for Aristotle, for all these people. There's always things have two orders. There's the order in which you learn things will generally not be the order in which they are, right? The hierarchy, right? Because as Aristotle says many times, and this was elaborated more again, like everything else, we start from things closer to, Aristotle has this language, you start from things closer to us,
medium-sized
and further, something like that, and further from reason itself. Mm-hmm. And we end at things closer to reason and further from us. So further from logos, from the truth, from the true principles. So we would start from here and go up, like in Yaakov in his ladder. But the world actually starts from God and goes down from there. And the Rambam's book is written in the order of the world, not in the order that you would learn it, which is why it's impossible to get anything out of it, because it's written in the wrong order for pedagogy. It's not, if you want to prove things, you have to start the opposite way. But he does, and that's the whole question of why he does that. I don't remember if we did this once. Anyways, but he starts in the top-down way, so he talks about God, and then he talks about, the first chapter is entirely about God, and then he drops right away to mitzvahs Havas Hashem. So Havas Hashem the mitzvah Havas Hashem is knowing things that God created. So that would be sort of the difference. And the point of that is, of course, to know God. So turns out, like I said, that's the means and that's the end. And that's why another thing, like if you could cheshbon this, you'll see that the people that think that the knowledge is a means to love will definitely think that love is not relevant to things that God created. Love is something that goes directly to God. How exactly it's possible to love God and what in any sense is not clear for anyone. But that's what they would disagree. In other words, they have a sort of disagreement, and this is very clear. I'm just saying it in, again, the most like vulgar terms, but there's a like very major disagreement what kind of faculty or what kind of thing touches the higher level. The Rambam definitely thinks that knowledge or intellect is what's going to touch God, in some sense at least, while everything else, if you call feelings or will and so on, will never touch God. It can touch created things. That's the nature of it. While some other people like saying it the opposite way. The Kuzari is very famously entirely in the opposite mind. He thinks that intellect grasps very low levels of things, but truth or God will only be grasped in basically in imagination or in feeling, things like that. That's the Chassidish way of thinking. I don't know who is right. I'm pretty sure the Rambam is right. Well, I don't know. But that's the very big difference. That's why for him love is a means to knowing, but because knowing is higher than love for him. Because by definition, you could love created things and so on, and they could lead you sort of to God, but you can't love God in any real sense. That doesn't really make sense. Whether you can know God in any real sense is a question for him, but at least it gets you closer. It's not clear that you can actually know God, even further down, but that's another discussion because you have to define know and God and all of that thing. Anyways, but that's an important point. I don't know how people got to this idea that feeling gets you further than knowledge. I don't know. I really don't know why they would think that, but that's what they think. Many great people, or like mystics, like they think like that. Like, wow, we have some kind of, I don't know. Okay. Anyways, I do know, but let's move on. Point is that therefore he gives you a three-part. This is important. The first halacha, that's I put it here. The first thing that Rambam gives you when he wants to tell you how the world works is he moves on from a two-part definition of the world, from a two-part division, which he keeps up here because he says explicitly in the end of Perek Beis, like these two chapters were Masa Merkava, the next two chapters are Masa Bereshis, but really Masa Merkava gets very clearly separated into God and angels, and Masa Bereshis it's also separated into two parts. So you really end up with four-part division of reality if you think about it correct in the way that he gives you it now. There's God, there's angels, there's spheres, heavens, and there's below the heavens. And these are four categories of being. Yeah, the sublunar world. Yeah, there's four. It turns out to be four categories of being. So the two is splitting it in half, splitting the difference in half, and the idea is Hashem and half of Hashem would split it at a third with 3/3, right? In other words, what I just told you, like if there's knowledge of God, the knowledge of everything He's created, then you will have one box for God, number one for God, and three for everyone else. That's just good to have some clarity in the boxes in your head for what's going on. So therefore, after he discussed God, he's going to give you his three-part categorization of created things, right? And his three-part creation is, again, going to be something like this. His way of saying it's not a very clear division. His way of saying it is like this. And he goes from bottom up in this, interestingly here. So not the way, not in the order that he should be going. And he goes bottom up. We have things like us, which are created. Well, number one, everything is created from form and matter. I don't know if we discussed what that is, but anyways, there's form and matter. And that is true for everything. So you already have sort of a two-part, but the problem is, but that's not true. Let's be clear. Everything is made out, everything other than God and angels, but well, anyways, everything that we see is created out of form and matter. And he actually doesn't give a definition of that here. The only place when he gets to give a definition of it is in Perek Gimel, in Perek Dalet, when he talks about the human soul. That's interesting. Why he does that. Like he starts talking to you about form, what he calls Golem and Sura, form and matter, and he doesn't really explain you where to that. Really, form and matter is something we mostly get from looking at animals, including the human animal, but from looking at living things in this world is where mostly we get the idea of form and matter. Of course, it's true for everything else also, but that's, I think, the primary case.
See, Rambam still thinks that spheres are hylomorphic, right? Just not in...
Yeah, but unchanging. 1 second, I'll get to that. But we're going to get to this in a second. 1 second. Point is, you have to first know that everything is made out of matter and form. The basic definition of this is matter is the potentiality of it. I think that the fact that it could be a certain way and not in other ways, which is already has some definition.
That's the matter or the form?
That's the matter. And the form is what it actually is. What well actually is a very bad word because it means nothing in English. So we have to say you could use the Greek word which is completeness of it. Entelechy doesn't help us too much either. But the point is,
its intelligibility derives from its.
The point is,
from being a form, right?
Yes, but it's the fact that it could change. And remember, this really started from an analysis of change. So the fact that things are what they are, but also are not what they are. That's basically, forms are what they are, and matter is what they're not. But what they're not is not as simple what they're not, because it could also be something else. So in other words, in the most simple way, if you look at a book and you say, what is this book made of? So it obviously has what it is, which is to be a book. Which is the account of being a book. That's the definition of being a book, the logos of being a book. Like it's a book, which means, well, I can give you a list of the things which might mean. You could try to find which is the most succinct, most correct definition. But the point is, a book is a thing that has words in it, and you could read, and they could have information, and so on. But now, obviously, that's not the entire truth of the book. And if you say that, you get into like these basic puzzles that the pre-Socratic philosophers got into, which is like, where did the book come from? Because either it was always existing and then it didn't come from anything, which seems wrong, or it's not. It didn't come from. It came from something, and then how did it get to where it's now? So it's not anything.
Resort to functionalism too quickly.
I don't know. You're saying words that I don't know what they mean. Speaking English. Point is.
No, I'm saying is, let's say what's a chair, right? So
no,
chair,
I'm telling you the problem. The problem with saying that a chair is something you sit on is that's not true.
That's not true because you have a toy chair. Right, you can have a chair with spikes on it, whatever. It doesn't disturb the definition of a chair.
Well, then it's not really a chair. No, the real problem is then it can't change. That's where the problem started. The problem is that if something is only what we would call later the form, Aristotle came up with this concept. So, in this sense, yeah, but not in this sense. Point is, if you call it the definite, so we should stop using these words because they only make us think that we know what we're talking about. And we don't. The point is, if something is what it is, then we can go and ask like the old question, which was, was it always what it is? And if the answer is yes, then there's no change in the world, because then it was always what it is, which seems very wrong. Now, if the answer is no, so you ask what was it before, right? Now, was it a book before? Well, it wasn't a book before. So then, where did the book come from? Now, it came from nothing. Because, in other words, it came from something that's not a book, which, as far as the book is regarded, it's nothing. So, how did this not book turn into a book? This is the basic problem. It's very hard to explain how not book becomes book. And since a book is a not book that became a book, because that's the truth. Because obviously we don't want to deny change. We don't want to pretend that the book was always, and the fact that it seems to have been empty paper before was just some kind of illusion or something, which is basically what Parmenides said. So you have to remember there were serious people claiming that.
What, that the world is unchanging?
Yeah.
A lot of pre-Socratics thought that, no?
This guy Parmenides, he's the
Pythagoras, sorry.
No, he's the guy that said this. The point is, but there's a very basic problem. I'm forget it. Just saying this is just showing you that this is such a real problem, because things obviously are. So in other words, if I ask you what the book is, this is very important. You have to be able to include in your answer what it's not. In other words, because it didn't used to be a book, right? And this is a big problem. If it didn't used to be a book and it's now a book, how did it become a book? Either they came from nothing, which is impossible. At least we assume that it's impossible. If you think so, right? No, he doesn't think so. He thinks nothing comes from nothing. Of course.
No, but I think
don't say too many things. No, nothing comes from nothing. All Greek philosophers in the world and all people that think in the world agree on this, for the most part. Nothing comes from nothing. So, of course, if it's not literally nothing, then we can start playing games. But nothing comes from nothing. So if it came, and the problem is that since a book is a thing that's also was not always a book, so you have to explain how that is true. This is the basic problem. I'm saying it in a sort of backwards way, but that's the basic problem. In other words, this is really what a normal person nowadays would answer. Well, of course, it was empty paper, and then you wrote words on it. So you have two parts, right? The paper.
But that doesn't tell you where its bookness comes from.
Well, good question. In other words, how did the paper become a book? So nowadays we would just say, well, someone wrote someone wrote on the book.
Or collected the pages, or
whatever it is, that whatever action is. That's what usually people nowadays say, which is.
But you have epistemological problems when you do that.
Which is a kind of solution. The problem with this solution is that it doesn't. Like you end up not describing what the book is again, because you're saying that a book doesn't really exist. In other words, a book is just people that. Other things, right? We resort to other things to explain one thing, which is not such a good thing to do. Because
I don't understand that.
Because I want to know what books are,
right.
Or what anything is. Now, right. It can't be what it is because it obviously wasn't always that. That's one. I'm saying everything backwards, so let's see if it works out. Okay, things are not what they are because they definitely were not always what they are. So part of what they are is that they're not what they are. This is a very weird thing. Part of being a book is to not be a book. Because was not always a book, and if it's not always a book, then it's not. But its definition is not being a book. So it's not really a book. Another way of saying.
So what's essential about a book is not.
I don't know why you said what's essential about a book. What is it?
I'm not using.
Well, you have to. Oh no, I don't care. All these were no because you're already saying there's something that's not essential. It is essential. I don't know.
What makes this tissue box?
Exactly. What is it to be? Exactly. Yes. What is what?
Okay. So. See, I don't know.
Okay, so people nowadays would give you different answers. I just have to be clear. But the point is, for anything that you have, it has something that it is. You could call it the function, but that's only one way of describing what it is.
Right. You
could say other words. Doesn't matter. It is what it is now. That's, in the complete way, right? What it is. That's what the word would mean. But it's also true that it's not entirely what it is.
That's assuming that something can't be true by composition, right? So I could say what is purple.
Again, right, because then you're saying that it doesn't really exist. You're again denying some basic reality.
That's if you don't believe that things can come into existence. That's
nothing comes from nothing.
The sum of its parts.
Nothing comes from nothing. I don't know. You're saying so many words all of them need to be defined.
So let me clarify then.
If you want to answer me that this book actually doesn't exist, that's the other answer that nowadays some serious metaphysicians try to say. But you could say that books, nothing actually exists. What we call a book is just the really, if you want to give a real definition, you'd have to give a very long story of how there was once paper and then some guy came and wrote words on it and cut the book and binded it and so on. That is what other people would say. And of course, a book is easy to say that because it's not a real thing; it's an artificial thing. About a tree, it's even easier, harder to say. But people would still say that there's no such thing as a tree. That's the answer. In other words, most people, normal people, that's where what people. Not that fictitious, but it's not real, and it's not. There isn't really such a thing. There isn't really such a thing as anything. Anything that is the way it is, since again, it wasn't. We still go back to the same question, right? If it would be true that it was always what it is, if Parmenides would be right, it would have a way to do that. Then we wouldn't have any problems. For example, right? Then everything would be what they are and finished. Very simply, I ask you what a tissue box is. It's a box of tissues. That's all it is. And all the things you could say about a box of tissues. It has, it's soft and it's useful for blowing your nose and it's sometimes. All of those things. All of those things are. If you say the word sometimes, then you ruin it. That's the problem.
You can't do.
No.
It's always a sometimes.
Okay,
right?
no. So again, if you really want to be consistent, you have to say that there's no sometimes. Ein sometimes v'elam klal. Sometimes is an illusion.
Either,
no. Yes, there are things.
No, how?
Yeah. Okay, like everything else.
It has to be a perfect tissue box.
Like everything else.
Right?
No, I don't know what you're talking about. You have so many ideas in your mind. If nothing would actually change, we have to deny a lot of reality, which obviously shows that things do change. That's a kind of a problem. And maybe you even get into some kind of self-contradictions. But the point is that we wouldn't have. I'm trying to find why change is a problem. But we wouldn't have a problem explaining that things are just what they are. I wouldn't need to add any ingredient to that. A thing is just what it is.
You can't say anything about it.
Well, all the things that it is, that's what it is. That's all.
But does it share anything in common with any other tissue box? Or
I'm not talking about you thinking about another problem. I'm talking about the problem of change. There's a commonality problem, which is another problem. There's the answer is of course Parmenides had an answer to the one and many problem, which is of course that there's only one thing. So that's same answer. So you got to the same conclusion very fast. There's only one thing anyways. There's no two things, so we don't have the problem of how two things can be one thing. There's only one thing, okay? There's only one thing and it never changed. If we say that, of course, we have to say all these things, but that's for another slightly different problem. It might be related, but it's another version of a similar problem. If there's only things that don't change, then we don't have a problem. The problem is that fact that things change. In other words, if you want to really accurately describe anything you see, even an artificial thing, it's easy to talk about, even a natural thing, right? People grow, people die, and so on. You can't say, well, a person is a person. Whatever definition you have in mind for a person, doesn't matter. Because a person is also not a person, okay? Now you could go to the other extreme, which is saying that it's true that it's not a person. Then you don't have a problem either. Then another basic thing of reality is an illusion, which is stability. You just say that there's no such a thing as people, no such a thing as anything. What we call people is like you could say something like that, some position of our mind, but of course that doesn't solve anything, it just puts the problem into your mind. But that's why that's not really what the ancients didn't do that stupid idea. What they did was they denied everything. Their mind doesn't exist either. And finished. And why do we think there's change? We're just all deluded and finished. Now, didn't really worry where the delusion came from, but it's just wrong. And they said that some of them did have a theory of where the delusion came. Anyways, point is, you can't put it into your mind. Putting it into your mind doesn't actually solve it. That just causes the mind-body problem. It just causes a bigger problem. It just pushes everything under the rug. But the point is, then you want to have the problem. Since we want to be normal people, you have to remember, this is something very important. All of these theories that nowadays think are crazy are actually the normal theories. The theories that we believe in are crazy. Because all the physicists nowadays go around saying tables don't exist. And that's nuts. Tables obviously do exist. I mean, seriously. We're just very used to that, yeah, the reality doesn't actually work the way normal people think it works, and everyone accepts it. You go to school, they indoctrinate you into this, like, what you think reality is, isn't. But that's a crazy theory. That's like a Kabbalah theory, basically, right? It's not a common sense theory. Aristotle is the common sense theory, because he tries very much to insist on the normal things. Now, the normal things, I'm just trying to, I don't know who's right, normal people think that tables exist, and chairs exist, and books exist, and things exist, but also that they change. Now, so what this causes us, well, we get to 3 levels in Aristotle's general description of change. But what this causes us to understand is that things are made out of at least 2 things. That's his basic answer. Well, there's a lot of other details in this. I just want to get to the list on my list. Now, in other words, anytime you tell me what something is, you just have to tell me what it's not, or a notness of it. Now, of course, what it's not is not enough either, because what it's not is just nothing, is not entirely nothing. But in what way is it nothing? Problem is that even if you say, well, it came from something which it's not, that's also not true, because things don't seem to just pop into existence randomly. So things change. In other words, change seems to have an order, right? We have young people turning into old people, old young trees turning into bigger trees, and so on. We don't have young people turning into trees and young trees turning into old people. That usually doesn't happen. Sometimes it might happen with an S, but this is the inside of nature. You have to remember, there's major insight. You claim that there's either change or not change. Well, the fact is that there is change, but the change is kind of stable. Usually cats give birth to cats, and humans give birth to humans. Sometimes not. I mean, evolution basically claims that it's also an illusion. You have to remember. If you're really a materialist, real reductionist, this is also an illusion. It just seems that way for the most part. It's not really true. But normal people think that there's some kind of order to this change. So therefore, when you talk about how things are also not what they are, because that's part of what they are, not only part of their history, right? That's part of what it is to not be what it is. That not needs to have some kind of definition, right? Needs to have some kind of, definition is not a bad word.
It's not of it.
Yeah, the notness is also something. It's a kind of something. And therefore we invent a new kind of something, which we call potential something. Potential something is a low-grade reality, which is known as potential something. And potential something is just the can be something. In other words, the fact that, when you tell me that a tissue box is made out of tissues, paper, whatever tissues are, and tissues, that they're also tissues, what you're basically telling me, in the more accurate way, is that these ingredients that went into the tissue box didn't have to be a tissue box. They could have been a tissue box, but they didn't have to be. Right? So now that's what we call potential. Potential is when we say that things could be, and they could be tissues, but then they could probably be paper, and they could probably be paper airplanes, and all kinds of things like that, but they can't probably be gold thrones. That's something that they can't be. So they're not being, in other words, when you look at the tissue box right now, and you know that it's somehow became what it is, well, that's another question, how the action of becoming what it is. But when you say that it's made out of some part or some kind, some part is the wrong word, but some definition of it is that it doesn't have to be a tissue box, right? But it also could be a tissue box. There's something like guiding it, or there's something like in the tissues or the paper or what it's made out of, that's what we usually mean by matter, what it's made out of, which has some sort of rule or some sort of nature, really, that it could be a tissue box, and it could be some more things, but it turned out to be a tissue box. Now, in the most general terms, we always call what it could be matter, and what it actually is form. That's another way of saying form or completeness. In other words, what it turned into be, what it is really, what it actually is. And of course, this fact is that this form is not fixed, right? We could still take the tissue box and grind it down and make it into something else. In other words, there's still some material in it. It's still matter, right? We could give a fixed form to things and this could never change, then it would some way stop being matter, or at least a part of matter, with the definition of matter, which means that it still has some changeability to it. So it's still changeable, meaning to say we could still make it into something else, and that changeableness is not random changeableness, right? We could make it into a whole bunch of different things, but not into anything. So right now, when you look at a tissue box, this is basically what people mean when they say tissue box is the form, the shape of a tissue box, and also made out of tissues or made out of cardboard, right? That's basically what they mean in the metaphysical sense, because what they mean is that it's made out of something which doesn't have to be a tissue box, but could be.
I think that's true by composition, right?
One second, and has, these are the two. I'm trying to divide it into two parts now. I'm not trying to look for the one. If you want to know which one it is both of them, yeah, of course.
What, the tissue box? No,
the tissue box is both of these things. You're saying words. Matter. Yeah, it's both of them.
Yeah,
it can't work without both of them. It can't work without both of them.
But this matter that could have been otherwise composed in a certain way that gives us tissue box, right? It could have been composed differently.
How? Yeah, I don't know. It's not only that. I don't think it's only that. I don't think that's another discussion of how, because it might also have more things that happen to it to become a tissue box.
Well, besides it's just its composition.
Yeah, that's another discussion. I don't know. That's another point. The point is that when you say, all you're saying is that it could have been something else, and it still could be something else, right? In other words, the matter didn't disappear. This is very important, because if you would think I'm just talking about like the history of it, it changed. Okay, so it has a history. That doesn't matter. The point is that it still has that history. In other words, it gain its tissue box? It still has. Well, that needs a cause. That we need to explain. So that's why there's always sort of three levels in this. Then. No, of course we did. What we answered is how it's possible for something to be both something and not something. That's what we answered. Now, how it actually happened, like what caused it to be something, that's not our question. Wasn't what causes change. Our question was how change is possible. There are two levels of question. Okay. What causes change? Well, that's another question. If it's a natural thing, there's something that causes change in it, which is the principle of nature or the soul. We'll get to. If it's an artificial thing, there must be some efficient cause outside of it which causes change. But that's another question. What causes change? The problem of change wasn't what causes change. We could find a bunch of answers to that. The problem was that change is just impossible. It's incoherent. Because change means nothing becoming something. And the basic answer is that nothing is divided into two kinds of nothing. There is absolute nothing, of which nothing comes, and there's potential nothing, which is nothing, which is potential something.
Nothing which has potential, okay.
Exactly. And it has potential always in a specific way. That's very important.
Is it nothing relative to the something?
It's nothing, and I don't know what you mean relative.
If you want nothing because it's not a house.
House, it's not a house, exactly. Okay. It's not a house, but it's potentially a house. That's important.
Okay,
and it's potential. In other words, it's
nothing
potential.
is not a category that usually includes wood. This is a separate definition of nothing.
No, of course it does. In other words, because wood itself, if you go down the chain all the way, you get into another puzzle, which is like, what's the nothing? Like, because wood itself is also made out of something, and so on.
You get to some kind of primary, right?
Ich weiß nicht. Where you get ich weiß nicht. But primary is just a way of saying nothing at all, right? But the point is that there's grades of nothing and something. Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's grades, at least two grades. In other words, at least three grades. There's absolute nothing, which we're not talking about, because that doesn't exist.
Right.
That's called the void. That doesn't exist. There's nothing, which is some possibility of being something. And there's not that nothing itself after it became something, but it's still somewhat nothing because it can still become other things.
Other things, right? Okay.
And in a certain way, that's important. So that's nothing of the something. It's not nothing, random nothing. It's not undifferentiated nothing, because in other words, it already has some kind of form, if you think about it that way. Or it has what he calls a privation. It can become something. It has a specific. Wood is a specific kind of thing which can make houses, but it can't make other things. So it has a definition. This nothing. That's really what makes it not total nothing. Okay.
Does Aristotle see? This is maybe just a question of my curiosity. Does he see, like, house? Let's say. So the nothing, the potential which became this house, for Aristotle, does that have to be one defined thing? Because it could be the scaffolding or it could be the wood. Maybe the wood is the nothing.
Again, we're asking what the house.
Scaffolding, right?
No, I'm not sure how that would help anything. No, the house is still made out of wood, which means that the house is made out of.
It's not made out of wood.
Well, if you make a house out of scaffolding, I don't get your question.
Okay, but then scaffolding has to be made out of wood, and wood has to be made out of something that makes it wood, right?
Yeah, you could speak on which we're always going to speak on.
You could introduce an infinite amount of stages, right?
You're always going to speak at a certain level, which makes sense to speak of. Of course, you could divide things, and maybe not infinitely, but you can divide things a lot more if you want. If you want, you could talk about the wood, or if you want to talk about, if you want, you can talk about the cells or the atoms in the wood. I don't care which level you want to talk about. You can talk about as many levels as possible. Whichever level we're talking about, there's going to be... It changes a story, sort of, that we say. Whichever level you can talk about, you're going to have to talk about something that changes. What Aristotle says is something that changes into, right? So that when we talk about change, that's why he says change is going to be three things. There is something that changes, and that's the nothing, or the thing that can change. And there's change, or in other words, what it could change into. And then there's what it changed into, what it became, which is the house. So a house is made out of what could be a house, which is wood. Well, of course, that's only one level of analysis, because wood itself, we could do the same thing for wood itself. But let's assume what we talk about. But if we'll do this, we'll never finish. So we're talking about at one level. It's made out of wood, and that wood was moved somehow from being wood into being a house, and now it's a house. And all of these things exist in the house. That's what a house is. A house is wood and a house. It's two things. And the point is that this is all philosophy. If you go with a binocular and you look at it, you're not going to find all these things.
Right.
It's very important, because the kind of matter that we think of, you could find with a binocular. The kind of matter that he thinks of, you can't find ever, because it's a concept. It's a definition that you could only see, because the problem is that anything that we would see by definition would have form. So you can't ever see things that don't have with their matter. Matter turns out to be more mysterious than form, because form is obviously what things are. You could see them. Well, you can't see them by themselves either, because
it has to be composed of matter.
Exactly. So therefore, any object that you're going to see is going to have both. But what he says, like the mind or the intellect can differentiate that. Since it changes, there must be a principle or a part that we call the changing thing, the thing that changes, and the thing that it changes into, which is the form. So these are matter and form, basically. That's basically what they are. Okay. Now, I'm back here. Now we can have, according to the Rambam, we can have, and it's not clear that this is, well, I don't know. We can have three kinds of things now. We can have changing matter form things, we could have unchanging matter form things, and we could have entirely unmattered things, which is going to mean entirely unchanging things, another way of saying it, right? So really it's three levels of change, if you think about this.
What are the three again?
Okay, there are things that we know, things, subordinate things, which are all these three, well, there's things that are subordinate things that change, so they're made out of matter and form, right? Made out of matter and form, which changes a lot, right? People die all the time and so on. Very changeable things. There are things that are made out of matter and form but don't change, which is why we think that they're made out of different kind. The way he thinks, they're made out of a different kind of matter, or really another way of saying it, they're made out of only one or simple matter, whereas everything here is made out of...
Does it contain any potential?
No, of course it contains potential. Of course, matter is potential, the same thing. You can't change it.
If it doesn't...
The point is that it doesn't contain different parts. It's not itself composed of different kinds of matter, like the four elements that we have over here, of which everything is composed, and that's causes change causes things to really causes a specific kind of change. You have to remember, there's different kinds of change. You have to also have a list of kinds of change. Okay. But one kind of change is what they call creation and destruction, right? So this, or being mortal, is an easy way to grasp it. So the things, according to him, things that are made out of different kinds of matter have this kind of change known as creation and destruction. So things become pens and then they stop being pens. Everything you see in this world basically is like that. But then we see things that are not like that, which are the heavens. They have some kinds of change. In other words, they have movement, the local movement. They do change. In other words, they're not entirely unchanging things. They're not eternal things in the sense of not being changing at all. But they are eternal things in another sense, in the sense of not dying, in the sense of not being given to creation and destruction, becoming and stopping to be. That's an important kind of change which doesn't happen to them, and therefore they must have a matter and form because they move. They're not unchanging for real, but they must have a different kind of matter and form, or at least a simple matter. That's what we call it, made out of one kind of matter, not a
this
compilation.
is a bothersome category, right?
No, it's very perfect, beautiful category. I don't see the problem with it, and because it's not. How did I say? They don't change. They don't change. They don't change from one form to the other, and so on. I don't know there any problem with this. They have a certain kind of change and not another kind of change. That's the way of understanding it. Okay, and then we can have the highest category, so to speak, which would be things that entirely don't change, the real eternal things.
Not even spatially.
Right, in no way. In no way change, and those things would basically not have any matter. That's another, right? Because they don't have potential, they don't change. Right, they can't change.
In what way do they exist?
Well, they just exist by their definition,
by
what they are. Right? Well, you could disagree that such things can exist. That's another machlokes, but of course, there's at least separate intellects that exist. Aristotle explicitly thinks that separate intellects exist. Why shouldn't they exist? I have no idea why would there be a problem with them existing? I don't know. What's wrong with that?
Okay.
Nothing wrong. Obviously, separate intellect exists. I mean, there's obviously concepts that don't need matter to exist. There's not really a real reason to think that they don't, so they exist. How exactly they exist and so on. No, they might have some, like I said, they might have some level of contingency, they might not. That's a big problem. It's not so simple. But at least we like to say that God is a higher category than that. But in which way is not a simple question to answer. Because it would seem that all these forms are eternal, at least in a very similar way that God would be. Okay, but anyways, point is, these are the three levels of, for the Rambam, they're different levels for sure. But these are the three levels of existence. And again, if we go back to our thing with the different sciences, different bodies of knowledge, then we would have Masa Bereshis for things that are created out of four elements and change, and created out of matter and form, matter being four elements of few matters, and those are the things that we talk about as Masa Bereshis. And then you would have something in between, which I'm not sure ever. Again, he himself is only halfway as clear. And he discusses this as a very important intermediate step. We have what they call the medium, the middle world, that's what they call it. Things that are, in one sense not changing and in another sense changing. So they do have matter, but they don't have change, or they don't have death. That's another way of saying it. So some kind of lesser. They have some kind of eternalism, some kind of eternity, but not another kind. And that's important.
For Aristotle, the forms. Sorry, I know this is
the intellect.
No, I'm just going back because I'm still kind of catching up a little mentally. The forms. Where do the forms come from for Aristotle?
No, they don't come from anywhere.
It's just in the thing.
Well, according to some people, they come from somewhere. I don't know. That's another question. Where they come from and how could it work? For the most part, he seems to think. He usually calls forms of a thing. He doesn't think that they come from somewhere. Then there's some people. I don't know. Some people think that they come from somewhere, but the Rambam thinks they come from God, or from the intellect. And maybe that's how the Rambam usually thinks. He does think that they come from somewhere, but they're not. They don't have separate existence for him. At least these forms of lower things don't have separate existence, which means when the thing dies, they die along with it, because they're just of the thing. They don't have existence by themselves.
Independently of each other.
No,
right.
They might come from somewhere, even, but they don't go back there, something like that. So in other words, they might be caused by something, but they're still not from there. They don't live somewhere and then come here. That's definitely not how he thinks of these forms. Mm-hmm. Even the Rambam, even though he has the thing where they come somehow. Yeah. Anyways, these are the kinds of things that exist. So what do we need to do from this? Now the interesting thing is, I'm going to finish with this. The interesting thing is that souls are in between category, or at least some sense of in between category. In between meaning
which category?
Human souls. So human souls have, well, really the real answer is that there's two souls or two parts, but human souls are, for one, definitely, the first definition is going to be definitely, they're just whatever it is to be the form of a living human thing, whatever, exactly. Whatever it is to be a human being, the thing that you see, the form of that, in other words, what it is to be that, that's what we call a soul. That's the first meaning of soul, and that level, that's entirely Masaviresh, is entirely, and the bottom level, that dies actually. The Rambam thinks that this is what we were talking about the Pasuk. This is what the Pasuk talks about when he says, V'yipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, God gave life to a unliving body, and that life, well, God giving it is basically means it has a form, and that life is what dies. When a person dies, that's what goes back wherever it came from. It goes back in the ground. So that's one level. But humans, and this is the Rambam claims, this is what makes humans analogous to God, have another part which is really what makes them human. So that's what makes it weird. And what really makes them human is not to be human, because the real part, and that's to have an intellect. Now, intellect for him is not the form of any matter, because you don't need anything to think. According to him, you don't think with any. According to Aristotle, at least according to the Sad, you don't think with any organ. There's no thinking part in your brain. There's an imagining part and so on, but there's no thinking part. Thinking just happens with your soul. In other words, with thinking. Mm-hmm. That's what it happens with. So in other words, your soul is basically an angel, what we call an angel. Basically a form, a separate form, and an intellect. It's a totally separate thing. It somehow exists. It's somehow connected with the body.
Potential that then became actual.
Well, no, they do have potential, so we can get to that. Or at least in the human, they have potential. That's another thing. Humans have a
potential. Was there a potential soul that then became soul?
No, there's potential people. There are people that potentially receive souls. That's really how you would say it. There are people that potentially receive souls. So in some sense, the entire human
with soul.
Yeah, depends what you no, you have to stop saying soul. You have to talk about form and intellect. In other words, the soul and the intellect.
Does the intellect have a form?
No, the intellect is a form. But it's obviously when we talk about humans, not all humans.
What's its matter?
No, the human. The human. It's
okay, yeah.
The person before the soul. The soul is the matter for the intellect.
That's what I'm saying.
But only in the sense in which it's a human, which is what really gets us into weird puzzles. This is what gets us into very weird puzzles, because intellect is not something that, if it's not something that needs any kind of matter to exist, it doesn't. Then it can be entirely separate, and if it's entirely separate, then it doesn't change. It doesn't change.
Okay. I'll go back.
Okay. So it's basically an angel.
Okay.
Okay, it doesn't change. It's basically an angel. Well, we have to figure out exactly which kind and so on. But obviously people...
Angels, or?
Yeah, sort of. But obviously people are not intellects, or not really intellects, or not actually intellects, right? So to be the intellect that people have, which... Again, you could look around and find that not all people are intellects, or most people are not. So it's not very controversial thing to say. And again, so there's some potentiality to get to that. And this potentiality must live somewhere. Now, maybe that's really the human soul. In other words, what we call soul.
The potential intellect.
Exactly. And actually intellect shouldn't be called soul either. It's just intellect. But humans somehow get to that. And then you get into real weird questions, which is, could this really be individual and so on? But that's the Rambam never worries about this question, or never talks about it. So I don't know. But that's the point. The point, what I was trying to say is, and this is Aristotle says this, or at least according to some people, it says that if we discuss these two kinds of ways of how certain knowledges can be better than others, right? So some knowledges are better because we know them more precisely or more accurately, because they're closer to us, right? So I know this table pretty well, according to him, because I'm sitting at it, and it's close to me also, like in the kind of tools that I have to understand things. But they're lesser things. It's not so important to know about a table. It doesn't give me any great pleasure. Like, I'm not getting anywhere. And there are things that are further from us, but are greater in themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be great things to be. Now, Aristotle says a soul has both malice going for him. It's both close to us, because obviously we are a soul, or we have a soul. There must be a close thing to you. You must know it very, very directly in some way. But also, it's a very first thing. It's a very important thing. Because it's an eternal thing, or at least partially eternal, or at least gets to eternal and so on.
So it does exist awkwardly.
Yeah, human souls are very weird. Everyone agrees with this. Human souls are a very weird thing. They're like
it's not awkward in the way it's awkward for modern science. It's saying this is awkward.
I don't know. It has some connection. They're not awkward. It's great. This is actually what allows us to understand everything else. You have to remember. It's the thing.
I'm just saying it's awkward.
It's the thing. Well, the thing is, if you wouldn't have a soul, then you wouldn't have any of these questions.
But that doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean
it should have been exactly. If humans would not have a soul, then the order of reality would make sense. Since humans do have a soul, the order of reality where we have these like 3 levels doesn't entirely make sense because there's some elevator in the middle known as the human soul, according to everyone, which it has some part of God or whatever, you wouldn't say God, but some kind of part of separate form or separate intellect. And some part of
randomly in the world of
no, it's not random. It's not random. It can't be random. If it's random, then again, Aristotle definitely would never be very not happy with you saying
No,
I'm
okay. I'm saying
with the whole idea that it's not random. It's not random. It's not random. It's not no. For him, it's not strange. Okay, you have to remember the whole reason he doesn't like Plato's theory of the soul is because Plato makes the soul strange in the world. He doesn't want that to be true. So you have to remember that because it's not going to work to say that it's strange.
Maybe you can integrate
it seems
it,
strange.
Right?
There's
it
a crown.
Needs integration, right?
No, you don't need to integrate. You need to start from things that make sense. That's what you need to. Okay, but I can't go further now. Okay. Point is, you basically need to explain the potential. That's why you need the potential. Potential is always the thing that makes things stop being weird, right? Because otherwise, the having babies is weird, right? Well, where did this baby come from? Well, the answer is that there is something in the mother which can have babies, right? And we could go through all the levels of can have until we get to the baby, and you'll show that there's actually nothing surprising about having a baby. In the same way, we need to do that for the soul. In other words, we need to start from the bottom. That's what Aristotle does in the soul. We need to start from the bottom, and we need to show how each thing is potential for the next thing, and up to the intellect, to which level, if he gets to that level, is another question. But that's at least his project. He wants to show how it's not weird for humans to have a soul, because a soul is actually what it is to be a human, because humans can be souls, humans meaning human bodies or whatever it is, the parts that's what they are. So that's actually his whole thing. He's very much trying to get away from the idea of the soul being weird. The Rambam definitely does have language, and Aristotle, that the soul is weird because he talks about human being unique, right? That's why we say that they have the form of God in them or something, analogous to God, or domele God, or tzelem Elohim, and so on. So he wouldn't be mad at you for saying that it's weird, but for the science of the soul, it's very important for it not to be weird, and that's why we need, even in the Rambam, we have to have like this whole picture of all the world, how the world works, and then the soul is just one thing in that world. He's not going to say, and there's something very weird about the soul. That's something that I say, but it's not something that he would say, because to him, it makes sense for the soul to be what it is.
It's definitely outstanding in this.
Oh, outstanding is a good sign. It's fine. It just has to be unsurprising. Okay. Or at least unsurprising in potential, meaning say it could be what it is, because then otherwise it can be what it is. Yeah, that's the problem. Then it's not, basically. So there needs to be a way in which it could be, and then it also should, but that gets us into like ethics that you should, but it could at least be what it is. Anyways, that's the story. Some of the stories. I don't know. Looks like it's enough.
What?
Enough stories.